Camellya, one of the most highly anticipated characters in the game that's been teased all the way since version 1.0, is finally here, and she checks off all of the boxes when it comes to what we've been missing on the roster and our hearts. She's a basic attack focused Havoc attribute DPS that brings a simple to learn but difficult to master playstyle that leaves a lot of room for error but many opportunities to shine. She might be the new holder of the title, Best DPS in the game, but requires a very specific playstyle to capitalize on her kit. With that, welcome to our full-scope, comprehensive guide on Camellya, the DPS we've been waiting just about 6 months for, and I'm here to break down everything in regards to how she works, what her best equipment is, and the steps you need to take across her team building and rotations to make the most out of her insane damage potential. As always, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Camellya, with her baseline kit, centers around the generation and consumption of a unique resource called Crimson Pistols to fuel her Forte circuit and grant her massive personal damage buffs for all of her attacks. And she has a lot of very unique attacks. Her default basic attack is a simple attack chain that can be enhanced after the third hit in her combo or her heavy attack by holding the button, turning her into a human Beyblade that rapidly deals damage. Her baseline resonance skill, which can be cast in the air, damages enemies with basic attack damage and activates Camellya's Blossom mode, attaching her to vines and leaving her completely stationary while enhancing her attacks with a massive AoE. Her basic and heavy attacks are replaced with a new attack called Vining Waltz, which can chain into 4 basic attacks. The third hit in this combo can be held in a similar way to her default basic attacks, allowing her to carry on her spinning while also dealing massive amounts of damage. She can still dodge and use dodge counters in this state. After entering Blossom mode, her resonance skill is replaced with Floral Ravage, which can be cast in midair and deals a large amount of basic attack damage while ending Blossom mode. Using Jump during Blossom mode is another way to inflict a large burst of damage while also ending the state. Blossom mode lasts permanently until Camellya ends it herself, and persists through character swaps. While in Blossom mode, Camellya's stamina will continually drain, and any attack made in this state will consume additional stamina, and casting Floral Ravage won't restore any to your character, making proper management of Camellya's stamina very important to ensure that you get off all of your damage while still leaving some stamina to dodge incoming enemy attacks. While Camellya has Crimson Pistols, every attack in her kit aside from her Resonance Liberation will consume 10 pistols to increase the attack's energy regeneration, generate Concerto energy, and a Crimson Bud, with each bud lasting 15 seconds and stacking up to 10 times. Her intro skill is one way to generate pistols, providing 100 after every cast. When Camellya has full Concerto energy, she replaces her baseline resonance skill with Ephemeral, which causes Camellya to enter her red-haired budding mode and consume all of her Crimson Buds. This enhanced state massively buffs all of her outgoing damage from all of her attacks aside from her liberation, with a bigger buff for each bud consumed. Camellya gains another 100 Crimson Pistols when activating this Forte, and consumes those pistols with every attack, with the catch being that all of these attacks have decreased energy regeneration and don't generate any Crimson Buds. This red-haired state ends when she consumes all of her pistols or leaves the field, and has a pretty sizable cooldown of 25 seconds. When factoring in all of Camellya's abilities and interactions with each other, she's a character who requires a fair amount of field time to reach her full potential. She first has to use her intro skill to generate pistols, and then consume those pistols and build up her Crimson Buds by attacking enemies with her basic attacks and Blossom mode attacks until all her pistols are consumed. She then activates her Forte circuit with her enhanced resonance skill and enters budding mode, repeating those same attacks just with a lot more buffs and damage. Depending on how long it takes you to use your pistols and generate your buds, there's a chance that buffs from a sub DPS like Sanhua's outro skill or those from Moonlit Clouds could expire before you triggered all of her buffed attacks after activating her Forte. This means that an optimal Camellya rotation can get a little complicated if you press the wrong button or get staggered by enemy attacks, but thankfully the rest of her kit is a lot easier to use and understand. Camellya's Resonance Liberation has 2 lines explaining it. It deals Havoc damage and can be cast in the air. That's quite literally it. Nothing in her kit relies on her liberation unlike other hypercarry characters, so she can simply cast the ability whenever her energy is full for extra damage across her rotations. The increased ER from her Crimson Pistols when outside of budding mode also help in maintaining uptime on this attack. Her outro skill, on the other hand, has two different attacks. The first, which is her default outro skill, should never actually be used, as it consumes the concerto energy that should be used to activate Ephemeral. Her second outro skill does additional damage if Ephemeral was activated, and since Camellya generates concerto with each pistol consumed, even in her budding mode, you'll have this second attack available in all of your rotations in your budding state as long as you consume all of those pistols without swapping off. Her inherent skills are also very simple, while also being incredibly powerful. The first grants her a 15% havoc damage bonus and converts her heavy attack pruning's damage to basic attack. Her second also grants a 15% havoc damage bonus while giving her built-in interruption resistance when using her default basic attacks, her basic attack 4, and her blazing waltz in Blossom mode. These are both incredibly powerful damage and quality of life buffs that will have an impact on her optimal echoes, which we'll be covering later. When it comes to actually building Camellya, starting off with her skills, you'll want to prioritize her Forte circuit, as it's a tremendous burst of basic attack damage that she uses in every rotation. Next up is her Resonance skill, as your blazing waltz attack in Blossom mode is your main way of consuming Crimson Pistols and dealing damage outside of your burst abilities. Next up will be her Resonance Liberation, as it's a great burst of damage, but doesn't scale with your main damage type. Finally, Camellya's intro skill and basic attacks will be lowest priority, as you'll never really use her basic attacks in optimal rotations, and her intro skill has very poor scaling with levels. Moving on to her weapons, Camellya has some incredible options as a sword user. After running through some calculations on her most damaging attacks across all of her potential options with their effects active, this is what the overall comparisons are looking like using Emerald of Genesis as a baseline. We'll go ahead and start explaining some of these results, starting off with Red Spring, her signature. This weapon is tailor-made for Camellya, complete with very good base stats, a 12% attack buff, and two different types of basic attack damage buffs. One that stacks up to 30% from attacking with basics, and a second buff of 40% triggered by consuming concerto energy, while still remaining on field. Camellya is the only character in the game who can trigger both of these effects, and her performance damage-wise is absolutely absurd with it, given how virtually every attack in her kit outside of her liberation deals basic attack damage. Next up is another signature, Blazing Brilliance. This weapon has a critical damage main stat instead of critical rate, and a weapon effect that Camellya can unfortunately only use a single part of. It's 12% boost to attack. Camellya deals no meaningful resonance skill damage, and this weapon only slightly outperforms other options due to the fact that it immediately grants its attack buff just from equipping it. While its calculations are higher, there are better options, leading us to our last 5-star sword, Emerald of Genesis. This weapon, rather than coming with a damage-focused baseline effect, instead has an energy regen substat, with the second effect granting a stacking attack buff every time a resonance skill is cast. Camellya can easily activate multiple resonance skills across her rotation, and this weapon at max effect has virtually the same exact buffs as Blazing Brilliance, but with additional energy regeneration, making it a better option in most scenarios. It's one of her top picks. Moving on to the 4 stars, Camellya has some strong picks here, namely the new Somme Noir Anchor. Free from version 1.4's main event, along with all of its syntonization ranks, this event weapon was also tailor-made for Camellya, with a fantastic base attack, ramping attack buff from inflicting damage, and perhaps the biggest benefit of all, a massive buff to critical rate once that attack buff reaches its full stacks. This weapon is insane, but mainly at max stacks, as it can give a total of 40% attack and a 12% critical rate boost. Unfortunately, it takes around 10 seconds to reach max stacks, meaning that its full effect won't be active for your entire rotation. Still, it's a fantastic choice and completely free. All the other 4 stars, unfortunately, are outperformed by this one, even at S5, so there's no real reason to level them up for Camellya considering it is free. Moving on to her echoes, Camellya has a unique set of optimal builds depending on which weapon you use with her. If you're using anything other than her signature, a 5-piece Havoc set with Havoc damage 3 costs will be your best bet for optimal performance. However, if you're using Red Spring, it gets a bit more complicated. I've run some calculations on her performance with a wide variety of different sets and echo skills, using a 5-piece Havoc set with the second effect inactive as a baseline, and these are what the comparisons are looking like. With With the weapon's big buff to basic attack damage and her 30% havoc damage boost from her inherent skills, Camellya has a great level of performance with lingering tunes and havoc damage 3 costs, actually outperforming a fully stacked sun-sinking eclipse set with the same 3 costs. Switching those havoc pieces to attack actually gets you the highest overall damage relative to all other options, making this combination the best for a Camellya with no external buffs. However, Wuthering Waves is a team-based game, and with all of the available attack buffs from Sonata sets, character skills, and your Echo substats, going with 1 havoc damage and 1 attack 3 costs on the havoc set will generally yield the best results. Crownless is also the best Echo choice here, as it can be quickly cancelled after activating it to receive its full 12% havoc damage buff. The resonance skill piece is irrelevant for Camellya, and she can easily cast her resonance skill or liberation while in the air to smooth out her rotations. For your ideal Camellya stats, you want to shoot for an attack of 2000 or above, a critical rate of at least 70%, and critical damage over 250%, with as many basic attack bonuses as possible from your substats. To cast her liberation with every rotation, you'll want at least 120% ER, but if you're okay with casting it every other liberation, you don't need any ER at all. Camellya is a character who has no built-in crit rate upgrades in her skill tree, with crit damage instead, which is very similar to Zhongli Yao, and what this means is that it's basically mandatory to roll crit rate on all of your echoes if you want consistency on this character. This means that your substat priority is as follows: critical rate, then critical damage, then attack percent, basic attack damage percent, and then flat attack, with boost to resonance liberation damage as the cherry on top. Keep in mind that since a majority of Camellya's damage is through basic attacks, rolling this substat on your echoes is almost equivalent to rolling a havoc damage percent on a piece. The last area of investment when it comes to Camellya involves your wallet, or a lot of savings, her sequence nodes, and she has some absolutely absurd upgrades available. Her first node is a sizable DPS increase of about 10%, providing an 18-second duration 28% critical damage buff whenever she casts her intro skill. This upgrade also grants her interruption immunity whenever she casts her enhanced resonance skill to enter budding mode, making it a combo of damage and quality of life. Her second node has an even greater impact on her overall damage, increasing it by around 43% relative to S0. It increases the damage multiplier on her enhanced resonance skill by 120%. If you have this node, make sure you've also maxed out Camellya's Forte circuit to get the most impact out of it. Her third node is easily one of her largest overall upgrades, with a 103% boost compared to S0. This upgrade grants 50% additional damage multiplier to her resonance liberation, and grants her a whopping 58% attack buff whenever she uses Ephemeral and enters budding mode. If you're trying to get the most bang for your buck, S3 is likely the best spot to stop, as it grants the most overall damage out of all her sequence nodes aside from her S6. Her fourth node isn't nearly as impactful as her previous upgrades, especially if you have her signature, as it grants a 25% basic attack damage boost to the entire team whenever Camellya uses her intro skill. This gives her some supportive capability, but the chances are nobody else on her team is actually benefiting from this buff. Her fifth node adds some insane damage multipliers to her outro and intro skill, making it another small increase to her damage, but the multipliers on these abilities aren't huge in the first place. Her sixth node is easily her biggest upgrade, granting a massive 150% increase to the multiplier on her budding state's damage buffs, for a max of 250% for the previous 100. This ability also grants her a second cast of Ephemeral called Perennial, that costs 50% less Concerto energy, but also only generates 50 Crimson Pistols, giving her a short extension on her field time. The damage increase here is absolutely absurd, around 130% over S5 for 260% over S0. It's powerful, but you're paying a lot for it. The last piece when it comes to Camellya is her optimal team comps, and she's actually one of the most affordable characters in the game. That's because her best buffers are both 4-star characters, and I've ran some calculations on their performance using both Shorekeeper and Verena as the third member of their teams, with Camellya equipped on the Havoc set and her signature. Both of these sub DPSs were calculated at S6, so their 20% team buffs to attack are factored in. Sanhua will provide the best overall performance, with an average of 9% higher numbers than Dan Jin, primarily due to how Camellya deals almost entirely basic attack damage. Sanhua's 38% amp does wonders for all of her attacks outside of her liberation. This gap closes a teeny bit if you replace Shorekeeper with Verena, as teams with Verena will deal significantly lower damage in exchange for faster faster rotations. Dan Jin, on the other hand, still provides a great performance through her 23% Havoc damage amp, and will also get you the biggest damage boosts on your Liberation, and in turn, the highest DPS, damage per screenshot. While her overall performance is lower than Sanhwa's, it's not by very much, and we have to keep in mind that Dan Jin will be rated up on Camellya's banner. A S6 Dan Jin, who you might very well pull while getting Camellya, will outperform a pre-S6 Sanhwa, so keep that in mind as you build up those wave bands. Both of these characters have the incredible advantage of extremely fast concerto generation and rotation times, so you can easily weave their buffs into team rotations to deliver a frightening amount of damage to your enemies with some of the smoothest playstyles in the game. Now that we've covered everything when it comes to Camellya's build in teams, let's break down her optimal rotation. Camellya's intro skill launches her into the air, making echo skills like Crownless unusable. However, casting her Liberation in the air immediately places her on the ground, allowing you to weave Crownless's buffs into your combos by following up on that Liberation with the echo skill, dodge canceling it immediately to gain its buffs, and then cast her Resonance skill and hold the attack button to spin until all her pistols are consumed. Then you cast Ephemeral and continue spinning until swapping off with your enhanced outro skill. If you're using Dreamless, you'll simply cast it as you swap off. It can take some time to get used to, but it'll get some amazing results once you master it. At the end of the day, Camellya is one of the strongest characters in the game, and is also one of the first limited characters that can fully capitalize on the outro buffs from characters like Sanhwa and Dan Jin. If you've been building characters like Havoc, Rover, or Encore, chances are you probably have one of these characters built and ready to go to start demolishing content with Camellya. She's a fantastic character if you can make the most out of her potential. She does have, in theory, the highest DPS in the game. As always, if you enjoyed this content, please hit that like and subscribe button. Peace out.